But our ties are bound by history and experience, which is much deeper than blood. Now go. Everything I know, I have passed on to you. You are my daughter.
Thank you, Mother.
It's not often that we talk about Devil May Cry 2 and its lore. We sort of just treat the game as a joke. The guns are too strong, the voice acting is laughable, the story is non-existent, and a lot of these takes are spread around the fanbase for a very good reason. It's because they're true. But I want to take a moment to discuss an aspect of Devil May Cry 2 I enjoy, and for once, sing this game's praises. The development of this game was a roller coaster, to say the least. But there's enough from interviews, fan books, and art books that show us there was plenty of inspiration that went into crafting the world of Devil May Cry 2, its settings, and the gallery of demons most of all. One of Devil May Cry 2's flaws is that while it has plenty of lore, most of it doesn't appear in the game itself. It was either tossed out of the English release altogether or condensed so much that it essentially tells you nothing that you don't already know. The enemy files in Devil May Cry 2 are especially lacking compared to other games in the series. Even Devil May Cry 1 had lore blurbs that you needed to unlock through different actions when facing the enemy. These days, we often play our digital re-releases readily available on our platform of choice, which means that manuals are nowhere to be found. And granted, most of the time, all the relevant information is in the game itself anyhow. In this case, we miss out on a bit of lore surrounding the land of the Dumary Island. In ancient times, a religion arising somewhere east of the Mediterranean Ocean split into many different factions. Its disciples quickly carried it to Western Asia, Europe, and North Africa. As time passed, some gods from the various sects were forgotten, others were assimilated into other religions, and still others were shunned as evil. For one reason or another, the gods all but disappeared. What few people continued worshipping them were branded as heretics. The dissenters were forced to turn their backs on their homelands in order to continue their beliefs. Venturing farther and farther away, the outcasts eventually found themselves adrift in an unknown land, floating on the outskirts of the New World. This was Dumary Island. Hordes of refugees of different races, beliefs, and languages crossed over to the island. The first to arrive followed the sea routes of the old Viking explorers around the North Pole and through the Pacific Ocean. Following them came runaway slaves seeking sanctuary. The newcomers all had a single common point: believe in a pagan religion. Tribes that had historically skirmished over old differences running deep in their cultures now lived together peaceably on the same island. As the generations passed, the former strangers blended together into a single people. Their mix of different languages, ethnic customs, and various gods gave birth to new, totally unique religions. The gods worshipped by the new blend of people were an ancient family of beings inhabiting a different dimension. They wielded strange powers and existed outside the concepts of right and wrong. Deities that were considered evil or pagan in the old world were, on Dumary Island, simply thought of as other gods. There were far too many of them to count. Rites performed in honor of these idols often resembled exorcisms and demon-sealing ceremonies. The priests of these cults were known as guardians and were sometimes called upon to protect the gods and their worshippers. Many were the legends of guardians who had borrowed the power of their own gods to defeat enemy gods. One recent tale, only a few hundred years old, told of a great swordsman appearing from the outside to aid in exorcising the most evil god of all time. Over the centuries, Dumary Island's success in supporting the worship of unique religions while maintaining its existence out of the mainstream has been nothing short of miraculous. Lately, however, agents of international corporations have quietly begun infiltrating the island. Their purpose is to acquire the special ores discovered in the island's interior. On Dumary Island, the people's simple religious piety, as well as the fabulous artifacts buried in the inner mountain, are now in great danger. Now, at first I considered that this little lore blurb was just something the translation team made up, like they used to back in the day when games ended up with very different stories in different regions. But I ran into a translation of the Japanese manual on Tumblr, which was translated through Google Lens. But from what I'm getting off this image, the translation team actually stuck kind of close to the background story. So we'll be moving forward with this in mind. Now, it was a lot to take in, so feel free to rewind and listen again if you missed something, but something interesting about that little lore dump was that it's one of the few times real-life locations are mentioned in Devil May Cry, even if they painted with broad strokes and just mentioned very fast regions and never really nailing down a specific city or country. But real continents nonetheless. People at Capcom, namely Bingo Morihashi, credit this game with pushing the world of Devil May Cry from the mostly fantasy-like world from the first game into this blend of fantasy and contemporary we've seen in the series ever since. It's not just castles and torture rooms now, we're in a city, fighting a corporation, and so on, with this lore dump in the manual being the first step we take in that direction. This also ties into Lucia as well, who I want to sit down and talk about for a moment. Not only is she our first playable character outside of Dante, but there's a lot that went into her design besides just inverting Dante's color scheme. Real-world locations are indeed mentioned in the manual, but it's never intended for Lucia to come across as one race or ethnicity. She's often headcanon to be South American, but there's a little more to it. According to Daigo Ikeno, quote, "Did you consciously design Lucia to look like someone from South America?" DMC never specifies a particular real-world setting, but it's clear that Dante's in some foreign country in DMC 2. He heads off to an isolated island. Lucia is supposedly descended from a long line of indigenous people on the land. More than that, though, we wanted a strong contrast to the heroine of DMC, Trish, and making Lucia a different race was an easy way to make that happen. We never decided on South America specifically. I think she might have some Asian heritage in her. Besides, there are many different people who live in South America, no? They say that as races continue to mix, we're going to get even more beautiful people in the world. Lucia was created with that thought in mind. Lucia is the representative of the Guardian clan mentioned earlier in the manual, even if she isn't truly human or of their blood. Within the lore, she embodies everything it means to be human in this world, fighting for others and not herself, much like Sparta did. In another sense, she also represents all the people that came together to make the Guardian clan from Asia, North Africa, Europe, and later the slave refugees who all came together at one point, united by a shared belief that turned them into kinfolk with a shared duty. Now another from a different world joins them after Lucia's creation. This one may not be human per se, but she is one of theirs nonetheless. That's the sort of subtle storytelling DMC2 does, whether on purpose or by accident. I always say, even if it was never intended, that doesn't make the thing you're seeing any less cool, especially when it's a neat little fact like this. Interpret things however you like. For now though, we're going to be moving on to discussing the second most prevalent part of DMC2's world, its roster of enemies. Many of the enemies mention real-world locations in history while also establishing their own, such as the game's first boss, Orangera. One thing I have to mention about DMC2 is just how lackluster the in-game enemy files are. They tell you absolutely nothing cool about the enemies by themselves, and instead you gotta go digging yourself. The Japanese files are apparently much more detailed, and thankfully you can find those same descriptions in the 3142 artbook. Orangera is said to come from southern rainforests, but that a tear in spacetime brought it all the way to Dumary Island. My assumption about the spacetime bubble or whatever that brought our favorite demon ape here was one of Arius' nefarious deeds. He needed a demonic primate to try and stall out Dante and Lucia. Secondly, the file mentioned native to rainforests, and my first thought was that this type of demon spends most of its time in the human world, but then I remembered how vast the demon world is said to be. Devil May Cry 4's Echidna inhabits a forest in the demonic realm, so it isn't too crazy to think that Hell also has rainforests, where more of these brutes are waiting for unsuspecting prey. And if I'm wrong and it turns out these things are in the human world, then I can only hope no one has ventured deep into the tropics in a long time. Two other bosses that give us more insight into the workings of the demon realm are the twin titans themselves, Tartarugian and Plutonian, both their names coming from Tartarus and Pluto respectively, both tying them to Greek mythology. According to the artbook, once again, they were based off the Titans, though I don't see much in common between them and the Titans of Greek myth, other than the fact that they were imprisoned at some point. Quote, "Twin-headed giants imprisoned in the lowest level of hell for defying the demon world's laws. These demons pride themselves on their incredible strength, and not even the iron gibbets that cover their bodies or the flails attached to their hands can slow them down. Either by slighting the Demon King Mundus' rule, or more likely Argosax, these demons ended up imprisoned in the darkest pits of the demon realm, and it looks like they're not alone down there. The Titans also command the gibbeted enemies you've been encountering since Mission 2, Agonophinis, Terrophinis, and Mortifinis. All three names derive from agony, terror, and death, respectively. Gibbeting was a very slow form of execution that left you to slowly perish over time. The executed would be placed in a tight metal cage that left them entirely unable to move, and hung out in public until finally they breathed their last. Dehydration, starvation, and exposure to the sun's heat slowly draining the life out of those hung in the gallows. The executed was left as a public display until their flesh finally completely rotted away, as gibbeting was really more of a spectacle than anything. A show of power from a tyrant that told of their brutality and intolerance for dissenters. The Titans were turned into an example, along with the Phoenix enemies, but nothing could stop their rage and their power from shining through, bringing life to the instruments of their demise. Or in the case of the Titans themselves, it looks like it never even did them in the first place. Lacking the skeletons that the cages of their underlings possess, and instead these demons pilot their still rotting flesh, turned blue and red with age and injury. Their torment is still happening as we speak, until he finally put them out of their misery. Torture devices seem to be a theme in this game, so let's look at Furiataurus. While it may seem to just be a random pairing of Minotaur and flames, there's much more to this enemy than meets the eye. Furiataurus' body resembles burning steel, and this rings true in its origin mentioned in the artbook. Quote, originally a bull-shaped, hollowed-out oven designed to burn criminals to death. The flames of calamity still flow through its limbs, fueled by the screams and rage of the executed. This is obviously referring to the brazen bull or the bronze bull, a Greek torture device in which the executed were placed inside a metal bowl and a fire was lit beneath them, so that they slowly burned to death. The story goes that the cries of the executed were turned into the cries of a bull, in an attempt to please the ruler was created under, Phalaris. Phalaris ruled with an iron fist, and so the sculptor Perilos set out to make a torture device fit for the king. And what he came up with appalled even the very tyrant he was gifting this invention to. The cruelty of the slow-cooked death wasn't what alarmed him. It was the sheer inventiveness that Perilos demonstrated in creating such a thing. How it not only slowly and painfully roasted its captive, but how it even attempted to make a pleasing sound so it doesn't disturb the king with their cries of agony. Phalaris would order the sculptor to test the brazen bull before him, and once Perilos jumped inside, he sealed the hatch and lit a fire beneath the bull. Perilos would come to know the very agony he had brought into the world with his creation, before later being removed from the bull and executed in a more typical manner. Whether or not the brazen bull was a real thing is so far unconfirmed. Historians haven't found any hard evidence proving it was or wasn't real, but in this world, it was real, and the pain it inflicts is still with us today until you finally set those screams free upon Furiataurus' defeat. Bolverk as a character done no justice by DMC2's final release. You can hardly even call him a character. The in-game files only say that he once fought against Sparta and that's it. Yeah, he fought the guy who everyone in the Demon World has beef with, but for some reason Bolverk is the notable one. You could say that Beowulf is a much more realized idea of this character with a personal grudge against Sparta. Originally, Bolverk would have spoken, and the dev team briefly toyed with the idea that whenever Bolverk speaks Sparta's name, his scar would glow, sort of a way to show the grudge he was holding. However, the Japanese file and artbook give us a much more important aspect of Bolverk, mentioning that he was once worshipped as a god in a far-off region before being reborn as a demon in some sort of great war. At first, I thought this meant that Bolverk was some other sort of creature before becoming a demon, but I think that perhaps Bolverk was a demon at the time of his worship, and the Great War could refer to his battle with Sparta, with Bolverk having stood on the side of the demon world against the legendary Dark Knight's rebellion. His name also comes from the Norse god Odin. Odin used the name Bolverk while he was in disguise trying to steal poems and mead from the Jotun, and perhaps this could have inspired DMC2's Bolverk tricking his human worshippers? Though this theory is admittedly flimsy, as Bolverk was Odin's name when disguised as a human. Other aspects that tie Bolverk to the mythological Odin are his weapons and choice of companions. You've likely heard of Odin's spear Gungnir in other media, but in mythology it's said that Odin will appear on the day of Ragnarok with Gungnir in hand and strike the wolf Fenrir. Bolverk is also accompanied by two wolves, Friggi and Geri, named after Odin's two greedy dogs. Overall, Bolverk's ties to Norse mythology don't really go beyond that. It would have been cool to see the character fully scripted and perhaps have alluded to more of his ties with Sparta. Might have helped the Norse theme come full circle. Now, there are a few bosses that I've struggled to find any sort of parallels or inspirations from culture in. Sources online are either limited or search engines have failed me. None of the books I've read helped either. Jokad Gulm's entry in the 3142 mentions that while it resembles a goddess from the Far East, the connection is currently unknown. The Devil May Cry fandom wiki identifies Jokad Gulm with Nua, the snake goddess, but look at this thing, it's clearly some kind of cephalopod. She's got tentacles, she's in water, and like many octopi and squids, she uses poison. I get that she looks like Nua and that she has a lower body of a serpent and the upper half of a human, but I feel like there's more octopus going on here. Strangely enough, there's very few gods and myths surrounding cephalopods, like the obvious Kraken inspiration here. There's a Hawaiian octopus god known as Kanaloa, but he's worshipped as a god of the underworld and doesn't have a connection to Jokakun besides that. I've also read up on a yokai known as Akoro Kamui, who was once a wrathful giant spider known as Yaoshike, and terrorized the people of Rebunge in Ainu, now modern-day northern Japan. The god of the sea heard people crying out for help in their prayers, and promptly dragged Yaoshike into the bay. Upon entering the water, he was transformed into a giant octopus known as Akoro Kamui, a wrathful sea god who would swallow any creature foolish enough to pass over him, from boats to even whales. The spider backstory could explain the poison connection, but the file states that Jokakun was associated with a goddess, not a god. So I'm really struggling to find a better explanation than just Nua crossed with a kraken. So I'm going to let you all post your findings and theories down below in the comments. Trimagia has their inspiration blatantly stated in their file and their name, being based off of the biblical magi, but I was having a hard time relating that to their elements and their expressions. The red mage of fire is very angry, the black mage of lightning tends to laugh in a sadistic manner, the white mage of ice remains as cold as the element he commands. Very simple. Combining their knowledge brings out an even greater magic that remains undefined, but looks a lot like just their elements combined into one big projectile. The three wise men don't have much info about them in biblical sources. They sort of only show up from Jerusalem to meet baby Jesus, give them their gifts, then just disappeared. There's not much correlation between the three magi and their elements. Tatiobesu not only has almost the exact same file between the game and art book, but it also has no concept art in the book or the HD Collections vault. Fitting for what I could safely call the boss fight in the series I want to forget the most. I did, however, find a Reddit post by True Roads 3 explaining the two-part name as meaning shield and to flint, respectively. Nocturne is in the same boat as Jokakun. It's just Mothra to me, as there aren't many legends around moths I could find, but the human face it has makes me think of Buddha statues like the Daibutsu, scattered around Japan. Ironically, Nephestorus' concept art also shows early on it resembled another one of these statues where it would break away to reveal the ugliness within, sort of similar to what I said in my previous video on Devil May Cry and the way it depicts angels. Make sure to go look at that if you haven't. One very interesting part of Devil May Cry 2's early development I really want to bring up was the inclusion of a rival character for Dante, who desperately needed something to do in the story he's otherwise barely involved in. A demon that goes unnamed and mostly unspoken about in the book is said to have had similar abilities to Dante and carries a sword that almost resembles the sword Vendetta from the final game. His only advantage seems to be that he can actually fly at any time, as opposed to the player who is limited by not only their current amulets equipped, but also how much of their DT gauge is left. Something of a spiritual successor to Nello Angelo, who would have been a very welcome inclusion, I feel. A character that keeps the player on their toes. It almost feels like this character was scrapped in favor of Bulwark, who fills in the humanoid swordfight archetype of bosses seen in every game in this series. Something that isn't mentioned in-game are the origins of the Mishra enemies, the monkey-looking things you find 4 variations of. The Mishra, the flaming Hamura Mishra, the venomous Giba Mishra, and the malevolent Jamatha Mishra. Ikano says that the Mishra are meant to be humans corrupted into demons, and that long ago, when humans breathed in demonic air, they were malformed into these creatures. Usually in Devil May Cry, the basic grunt enemy is an object possessed, or in the case of Devil May Cry 5, an actual demon who is able to cross over. But here in Devil May Cry 2, the lack of any humans in these cities becomes more haunting. We learn that these infernal beings you're fighting are once people. Now you have to put them down before they harm anyone else. Adds an almost Resident Evil-like guilt akin to putting down Marvin in Resident Evil 2. Considering Dante's guilt for the humans he had to put down in the Devil May Cry 1 novel, it's very likely this was also eating away at him if he's aware of where the Mishra came from. And for Lucia, it hits all the same. The name comes from the Japanese word mashira for monkey, specifically the Japanese macaque. You may have seen these 3 wise monkeys telling you to see no evil, hear no evil, and speak no evil. Occasionally, you may find the odd 4th monkey who tells you to do no evil, ironically completing the quartet and perhaps corresponding with the Mishra. And finally, we have Argosax, the despair embodied. Argosax the Chaos is quite simple in my eyes, just a lazy video game boss that's literally a blob of reused assets and not an interesting fight whatsoever. Meanwhile, Argosax's true form offers probably the closest thing to a decent boss fight in Devil May Cry 2. His attacks are fast, telegraphed well, and they're pretty varied, all things considered. Argosax's true appearance evokes images of the alchemical end goal, the rebus. See, the art book and enemy file tells us that Argosax was inspired by the idea of the perfect being that embodies all opposites at once. It embodies the male and female, the sun and moon, the body and spirit, the vertical and horizontal. All things that go hand in hand but are still separated nonetheless, much like the demon in the human realm. It makes one wonder why Argosax not only looks so human, but embodies such a human concept. We've discussed demonic deception before on this channel, but this is something quite different. Argosax is the only demon king who never speaks, whose two forms are dramatic shifts from one another compared to Mundus and Urizen, who requires a very lengthy summoning process that involves human relics and for a solar eclipse on the human side of dimensions. Remember, Mundus undid his own seal with time, and Urizen isn't even from the demon world to begin with, and thus, that got me thinking that perhaps Argosax doesn't just look like the Rebus, he might have been created through the idea of it. As we know, demons can be born through a variety of ways. Some are humans corrupted into infernal beings, such as the aforementioned Mishra. But why not corrupted human thoughts? Alchemy is all about transformation and change, and the alchemists of Devil May Cry's world could not possibly foresee that their wishes would create one of humanity's greatest adversaries through a transformation of their wishes. Alchemy has this history of being conflated with magic in our culture, thanks to some of the writings about alchemy becoming very esoteric in an attempt to keep the study from non-alchemists. Along with the fact that alchemy was built on concepts that made sense to the scientific mind at the time, and this was a time when science and religion were not separated from one another like so many would tell you they are today. It was widely accepted that religion and science went hand in hand. In this world, the study of alchemy and the deepest, darkest desires of the alchemist created a demon so powerful he would rival Mundus himself. By the time Argosax would reach the human realm a couple of centuries before the events of Devil May Cry 2, alchemy was likely shoved aside as a pseudoscience, so there were no scientists to celebrate the manifestation of their work. Instead, Argosax is falsely worshipped by the people of Vida Marli until they realize what he is and Sparta steps in to help seal him away. Though this is all wild speculation, and I'd love to read any alternative theories you may have in the comments below. The mystery of why Argosax looks and exists the way he does is something I think this community's lore masters don't really talk about. There is so much more that went into Devil May Cry 2. I haven't talked about any of the architecture of the ruin and its possible cultural inspirations or the absolute banger ambient soundtracks paired up with them, but I just wanted to take a moment and appreciate some of the more obvious things about Devil May Cry 2. I know we have a widespread habit of just writing this game off as a mistake and nothing of worth, but sometimes you have to sit down and remember that people made this game, and there was a lot that went into making it. This was someone's life for a year or two as their job. Let's take a break from laughing at the game's balancing and its laughable dialogue to talk about the things it does do well, and not let Devil May Cry 2 just become a meme of the series. Alright, this is take 2. It is so shocking that a few months ago I ended up recording that last bit about being more sympathetic to people putting their time into something, and then here I am, an overly delayed video. This was my life for a couple of months now. I'm begging for forgiveness here for taking so long. The irony is not lost on me, I'll tell you that much. But this video took much longer than originally intended, and I'm so sorry about that. Things got scary in the world for a little bit. This video wasn't my focus for the longest time. I was more putting my mind to my hobbies, and it's ended up being less something that I sit down and I do for a couple of hours, and more like something I would hack away at little by little between doing other things. So it didn't make for a very good workflow, and it ended up stretching what was probably like a month-long project at most to like 6 months. I am so sorry, but there was so much. There was so much that went into recording this. I had to record while I was sick because at some point I got so sick of delaying the audio recording that I just powered through it. And you can hear that in some of the voice clips where I sound like I have a stuffy nose or like I mispronounced something. And I didn't bother to re-record those. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't think I'm gonna be making something that's this long ever again because this video ended up much longer than originally intended. I don't think the format that I do is suited towards long form video, so I'll probably just stick to 12-15 minutes. I'll try to stick to that much. But I also said originally in that last video that I didn't want to just talk about Devil May Cry, that I want to talk about other games. But honestly, these last few months, even this last entire half a year, I've just been playing more Devil May Cry in general. I don't know, maybe the worm in my brain that's telling me to make more Devil May Cry content might just win. instead of me talking about some other games. You know, maybe about Final Fantasy or No More Heroes. I've been playing that again recently. So right now, there is no next project in the works. There is no release schedule. We don't even have anything planned for the other channel, for Swampment Co. at all. So this is going to be silence from me for a little bit. But yeah, that'll be it for now. My name is Mr. Grimm, and I look forward to seeing you again.